SBDC for 21 years now, and I'm happy to announce that we have a new addition to that position. Ed Miles, who is on this call, has been a Seacoast business advisor for 15 months now. He's been doing a stellar job, and under my mentorship, will be transitioning. He effectively took the job officially yesterday, so congratulations to Ed. And so I'll still be half-time for as long as they want me, I think, or whatever. But certainly at least through August of 2022, and hopefully after that. So I want to take this opportunity to congratulate Ed on this position and welcome him to this full-time position.
Thank you, Warren. Hi, everybody.
Great.
Looking forward to it. Yeah, and I'll become a regular on this call, and I know I have a lot to learn, and Warren and I are going to be working very closely together the next several months. So look forward to meeting. I've already met several of you in person, and look forward to understanding organizationally everybody's roles and what everybody does. So thank you very much, Warren.
Thank you both.
I just want to add, Ed comes from a strong business background, and his input into SBDC, client input into the SBDC, and procedural and policy input and webinar input over the past 15 months has been really good. He was a great hire. We were so happy that he applied for this position because it was kind of a no-brainer. So I think you'll all enjoy working with him.
Ed, congratulations on behalf of all of us. We're so excited. So welcome, and forgive me for being corny for 1 second, but Warren, at the same time, thank you so much for what you have done for so many years. I cannot tell you, I couldn't have done so much without you for so many years. So thank you.
Great news to start the meeting. So I'm going to transition now and share my screen. Let me get that. Move it over here. Sorry, I'm fighting with Microsoft Word on the background on my end. So as with last week, it's a little bit tough to both manipulate the whiteboard and be able to see people. So I think I'm gonna hand the facilitating over to Nancy, and I am going to populate. See if this is gonna work. It is going to work. Can everybody still see it if I put it that small? Shout out loud. Yep. I can't see you.
Yes.
Perfect. So I'm going to keep plugging away at this. Nancy, do you want to take it away and start talking through where we're going to rank these, starting with number 1? This is the infrastructure slide.
Just a little background of what we're doing for those who weren't on the call last week. We're doing an exercise. Basically, these are action items, short-term action items that this group has come up with, and priorities about things we can actually work on. So we have 2 themes left: infrastructure and quality of life. So what we're doing is basically looking through those action items and ranking them on a scale of high feasibility, low feasibility, high impact, and low impact, so that we can figure out which are the most viable and effective things we can do. So number 1 on infrastructure is to study opportunities for system linkages and expansion, such as combine water systems to be more resilient to contamination, link sewer systems to expand capacity, and evaluate expansion and or construction of wastewater or sewer infrastructure?
There are 5 more. I'm still working on these, but help create a transportation system that's not reliant solely on automobiles, consideration of creative placemaking or public art within infrastructure projects, link higher density housing to sprawl prevention through zoning, create a long-range port improvement plan to ensure growth of this critical gateway for commerce, and electric vehicle charging stations.
Aren't we just doing one action at a time?
We are.
Okay. Do you guys want me to read that first one again?
Yes.
Yes.
Do we want, since, I have a question for you.
Mhm.
Since the infrastructure bill was signed and is now law, do we want to increase the feasibility for those that are part of that, for those items that are part of that bill? In other words,
Yes.
Okay, that was quick. That was a quick answer.
But you're right, feasibility just went up 100%.
It did for EV charging stations and wastewater and freshwater infrastructure, transportation system that is not reliant solely on autos. That all went up, feasibility part of it.
It did, but right now I've got them all hanging off to the side. And we're looking for where to put them. So starting with that first one, where we,
System linkages and extension.
I think it's really an important one, but the feasibility is gonna be a little bit difficult considering the colloquialism.
So high impact, medium feasibility.
My guess is high impact, medium at best feasibility.
Okay, anybody else?
I'd put the feasibility a little bit lower than medium.
Okay, should we move on to number 2, Route 1A, Ocean Boulevard and Hampton Seabrook Bridge? I don't recall more about that.
Comes in from the REDC's CEDs.
Okay,
So when Jen, I don't know if Jen Kimball's on the call with us, but when Jen and I were looking at the priority projects in the CEDs, that was a regional impact one as opposed to kind of more local site specific one.
Yeah, and I am here. I can speak briefly. It's been on in our CEDs for a while, and of course the state has the bridge. The current bridge that goes over the harbor is on the 10-year plan, and I believe engineering has started. I'm not 100% on that. I haven't checked in a while. And then there's a plan that's in development with the state for all of Ocean Boulevard there, which has a huge impact on not only the infrastructure and traffic flow, but tourism down in that area.
If I may speak, I have been involved, for a number of years now with the Route 1A Ocean Boulevard, and then also sit on the advisory board for the Hampton Seabrook Bridge. And in my opinion, it's also looking at the New Hampshire Transportation 10-year plan. This project is, in my opinion, very high in priority, has a major impact on the whole Seacoast area. So I would indicate that in both, and it's feasible because it's already in the plan. They're planning actually to start the construction of the bridge somewhere between 2023 and 2024. And then the Route 1A Ocean Boulevard, they're still working on their engineering design plans, but they're looking to follow up after the bridge is completed to continue on with the then construction of Route 1A Ocean Boulevard all the way from the bridge up to High Street in Hampton.
Thank
So
you.
I guess my question is for the MPO, and I just saw Tim hop on and then his picture disappeared. If this is already in the 10-year plan, is there anything else we need to do with it?
I believe that there is, and that is the, I might be out of line, not out of line, but we need to encourage the priority. And I'll give you an example. Right now, the Route 1A Ocean Boulevard has been in the plan for, I'm going to say, somewhere close to 8 years, 9 years. And we've hit a kind of a roadblock. $9 million was allocated a number of years ago, and that number has not moved. But what has moved is the timeline of it not being completed now until the late 2020s. It's also gone to a project where we're now talking about a $30 to $35 million construction project. And at this point, it's not been identified where that extra money is going to be coming from. So I think it's a priority to try to move it up the ladder in the 10-year plan. So we should be advocating for that, but also advocating for possibly this infrastructure money, some of that money to be allocated towards the construction of Ocean Boulevard. The bridge, the money is already in the 10-year plan for construction. So money has already been in play for that, but not on Ocean Boulevard.
Wait, so I understand what you're saying, John, and I totally get the economic impact to the particular Seacoast regions of Seabrook, Hampton, Hampton Beach, and Rye. But why can't we roll that into number 4? Because if we prioritize transportation investment in the region, that would take high prioritization, similar to exit, similar to exit 10 on the Spalding Turnpike for Somersworth, which has been an ongoing discussion relative to that project for probably 20 plus years now. So I'm not sure why this is the only project that we've separated here.
I think the reason from an economic perspective is that it probably has the most impact on the local and regional economy, given what Hampton brings to the table. That's one reason just to separate it out compared to some of the other transportation projects. But I think John more or less covered it. I mean, the project, the bridge is moving forward, heading towards construction if all goes well. As I said, 23, 24, at least getting that started. I think, the reason to continue to advocate and work with our partners on on the Ocean Boulevard project is, I think the climate and, sea level rise issues are still a bit of a challenge there as to how you handle those. And that's going to transcend a lot of other topics that you have listed here as well. But I would say it's a high priority. The bridge is going to have a high impact. I think, Ocean Boulevard also have a high impact. I think it's the feasibility is still a bit of a challenge for some of the aspects of designing and building out Ocean Boulevard the way some people want it. But
so it sounds like for this action, the thing that this group would be doing, we are not going to implement route improvements to 1A. We're not going to handle the engineering. We're not going to construct the bridge. The thing that we would be doing would be supporting RPC in terms of advocacy, most likely to gas it when it comes to prioritizing the projects. That's essentially what you would be asking for, right?
Well, yeah, and it wouldn't even be supporting RPC because we won't advocate really. It's not our role, but it's supporting the community and the communities around Hampton, I guess is the way I would phrase that.
Okay.
Can I jump in, James?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with Warren on this. This is a one-off project. I think as an example, as I would argue to the region, Webster Street Pump Station in Exeter that needs to service the hospital being a regional hospital. It's a project. This is a project. We all have a project. So I think before we advocate for any one project, we should put all the projects together if we're looking at it from a CEDRs perspective and say, okay, well, these are the ones we want to prioritize. I'm with Warren. I think this one project should, go into another project, into the overall list of projects we would look at, support, advocate, whatever way we want to. I don't disagree at all. It's a super important project, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's more important than some of the other ones on the table that are in the CEDs that didn't get funded as well. CEDRs CEDs.
So
I would agree with Warren and Darren on that point. I think all the projects should be put into a hopper that gets prioritized one by one.
So maybe the action just becomes advocate and support regional transportation project.
1 into 4.
yeah, so I was just gonna, because we had it on as its own thing, I was gonna note it like that. And note that 2 is sort of becoming part of the larger 4. We'll think about all transportation projects sort of together and see if there is a way to advocate on behalf of a variety of needs, or all of the needs that we've identified through this. And if we can sort of rank number 4, acknowledging that that is where we are considering number 2 to fall right now. I don't want to completely lose it entirely since it was on the list previously, just sort of understanding that it's now a subset. Does that make sense?
James, a point of information. Is it your plan to list all of the transportation priorities by DOT within both Stratford and Rockingham County? Because I know that just in my area, my 5 service areas, there are 7 projects right now that fall within the 10-year plan. And I would suspect that there will be many more if we start expanding that into Stratford and the rest of Rockingham County. So is it your plan to list all of the
So John,
projects?
I would say no, we do not have that much of a plan. What we are doing here today is trying to figure out what this group wants to work on. And if what this group really wants to work on is transportation stuff, we will sort of come up with a plan and figure out how this group fits into that. But what we're going to need to be careful with is the fact that SRPC and RPC are both metropolitan planning organizations already. We wear transportation planning hats. And when we are wearing those hats, we are responsible to our technical advisory committee and our policy committee, which is our commissioners. So, I don't want to discourage this group from looking at transportation and wanting to work with transportation. I just need to acknowledge that, we need to be careful, and we probably need to put our heads together outside of one of these meetings to figure out how we as regional planning entities would be able to balance, supporting this group with supporting those functions. So I would leave it as, I'd prefer to get this group's understanding of how important it is to you to work on that kind of stuff first. And if it turns out to be important, I think we'll need to circle back and figure out how best to do that. Jen, anything to add? And Tim?
I do. Can I go, Jen? I was just gonna say that, I think it's fine to lump things into the number 4. And put them all together, because the transportation planning process will sort out the rest.
Correct.
And all of John's concerns about advocating for it and it being a priority will take care of itself in the MPO process. This group doesn't have to be concerned. You can be part of that, but you don't have to make it your issue.
Yeah, I would say exactly what both James and Tim have said. Like the individual projects will work their way through the project solicitation, evaluation, and advancement process through that state transportation planning process that we engage with. And that's something that is fed from the municipalities up through the regional planning commissions to the state. To that end, though, I think, as an initiative for this group and something where it's within the realm of this group's power to influence, I would say it's more so for and going through and advocating for investments in the transportation system. I think that's where we have an opportunity, and that individual project solicitation and advancement, I think, is from our end best suited to go through the formal process. It's a federally delineated process that those projects go through.
Thank you. I'm going to move us on to the next one just because it's 9:25. We've only gotten two, well, I guess 3 done. Projects identified in municipal hazard mitigation plans and climate change vulnerability assessments. Any thoughts?
So I would pose to this group, like, how would we as a regional group of stakeholders influence this? And what would be our role in implementing projects in individual municipal hazard mitigation plans? I think that's one of the things that we need to think about as we go through this evaluation process, is what is our role? What would we do as a group?
Can I ask a quick basic question? What is, for somebody who's not with municipal or regional government, what is a hazard mitigation plan, and how does it affect climate change? Quickly, with the 3 or 4 bullet points.
So a
James, you wanna
hazmat
take it?
plan, FEMA more or less has 2 ways of dealing with hazard stuff. There's the after a hazard has happened kind of money and programs, and there's the anticipating that a hazard will happen kind of money and programs. And in order to be eligible for the before a hazard happens money, municipalities have to keep updated a hazard mitigation plan that they do every 5 years. In New Hampshire, those can be multi-jurisdictional. In New Hampshire, they are pretty much every municipality does their own. And usually those are, or frequently they're done by a regional planning commission on behalf of the municipality, grant funded through HSEM. So those have a series of, again, wish lists to, we would like to implement this kind of things for, this is how we can mitigate flooding. This is how we can mitigate and lessen the likelihood of power outages due to winter weather, et cetera, et cetera.
It's not hazard mitigation, James. It's more emergency mitigation, because when I think of hazard mitigation, I think of waste, I think of chemicals. So I don't know if hazard is the proper word.
Warren,
It is the word, though.
it can be both natural and man-made hazards.
Okay.
I think too, very broadly, and I may be an island in a vacuum on this thought, and I can't even articulate it well, but floating in my head, is we're a group of economic development directors who have gathered together to create jobs and improve the overall economy to attract more employers into the area to create more jobs, enhance the quality of life. We're not engineers, we're not planners. I mean, I get how all of this dovetails, I get all of that, but I think it is a little on the edges of other areas that aren't, at least directly in traditional ways, economic development.
Maybe we change that.
I-
Sorry, Dan. I was going to say we could rechange the wording of that projects identified to, talk about economic disruption, because I write a lot of those hazard mitigation plans. And even in the CEDs now, EDA requires CEDs to address what they call resiliency and economic disruption. So under FEMA's description of a natural hazard, infectious disease falls under a natural hazard. It's out there in the environment. So for the first time for a lot of these plans, we're talking not about short-term ice storm infrastructure disruption. We're talking about large-scale economic disruption as a result of a natural hazard.
And
Maybe we
job is,
word number 3.
yeah,
But I think you're right, Robin. We're not engineers, and you're not going to be citing culverts, but certainly the pandemic was such a large-scale, long-term economic disruption that municipal government and CEDs and this group now have to put into our wheelhouse.
but again, it's who's sitting in
think,
this chair. Do I bring in the director of planning and hazard mitigation and our engineers and architects, or am I sitting in this chair?
I think those guys are creating a plan, kind of like the 10-year plan. Someone's created that hazard mitigation plan for their municipality. The state does one for every county. And perhaps along the CEDS process, there's projects in those plans that fall into the work that you guys are all doing. And I think we're all still figuring out which silo those may fall into, right? Because hazard emergency management directors are very competent at dealing with ice storm and power outages and flooding. But this natural hazard, COVID, fell right into your office. So we'll figure that out, I think, as we go along.
So do we think we maybe need to revisit this one at a later time and to either reword it or to come up? I think if we can't identify a concrete action, do we keep it in here right now?
I think, frankly, most of what you're talking about gets done at the municipal level. I think where this group has a real part to play is when these things overlap municipal borders. Instead of us having a whole bunch of municipal silos trying to work on something, this group can maybe get a plan together to address those cross-border issues that are of a larger magnitude than just the municipal effect.
That actually brings us to number 5 very nicely. Yep. Thanks, Darren. Support legislation that encourages sharing of intermunicipal infrastructure. So does it seem like those two could kind of be reworded and put together?
I mean, I think what I'm hearing is number 3 is certainly a low feasibility for this group. It's more feasible for other groups to do. And potentially a low impact. If this group were to try and take number 3 on, there are other people who would be able to have a higher impact by doing that.
Okay.
Number 3, I think that where it intersects with economic development in my mind is, especially here in Portsmouth, where we've mapped out long-term climate change impacts, which directly affects our central business district and a lot of residential areas as well. But I see the resiliency planning as a big component of this, and I don't know if that maybe it's more of a rewording there. And in the SBDC survey, it's always kind of discouraging for me to see how few businesses have resiliency plans that would include something like the pandemic, but also long-term climate change. So I think that's more where our wheelhouse is, That's just my 2 cents.
Thank you. Are we happy with where number 3 lands? We'll move on from it to number 5 again, support legislation that encourages sharing of intermunicipal infrastructure.
To me, this is an issue we've been talking about for years. How do we get rid of the silos of each particular community and try to work together towards the greater good in the Seacoast? You know, the city of Dover has done some amazing things, very preliminary and small, but around affordable housing, one of the 3 areas that I view as critical to problems to fix over the next 5 to 10 years. What others, you know, how can we work together to create proper zoning for what needs to be done moving forward? I think that sharing of resources is really important, and I would like to see that in the upper right quadrant.
Right.
I agree with Warren.
I agree with Warren.
I do too.
Warren's retiring, so you become a lawyer now. I agree.
All right, let's go on to number 6, help create a transportation system that is not solely reliant on automobiles.
And this one was a lot longer. I just took the beginning, but it was generally supporting public transit, commuter rail. What else do they have? Sustaining other local routes and expansion of routes. It was mostly transit focused. Maybe some walkability focus as well.
I think regional airports should be included in that as well.
That's a good point.
I think that it's going to become increasingly important in the future.
So
You think regional what? Sorry, Dan.
Regional airports like Skyhaven.
Why don't we add the word help create a regional transportation system? I agree. I think
the adjective is support. We're not, again, the engineers and designers, but support the process that establishes it. Or
right, this much like number 4, guys. It's the same issue. I mean, there's an entire transportation planning process in the state and in federal law. All you have to do as a group, if you want to influence it, is participate in that process.
Right.
And that's, to me, that's very feasible and could have a, you know, I'll be optimistic and say it has a high impact. But it's all set. You guys can just go and do it and make it easy on yourselves and don't have to think anymore about it.
Thank you, Tim. Number 7, consideration of creative placemaking or public art in infrastructure projects.
Where's Tony?
I'm here. I guess not being part of the discussion that led to that, but just looking at the words, I think it's feasible if it doesn't cost any money. If you can get volunteers to do that or some grant money from New Hampshire Council on the Arts or something.
So I would jump in here, Tony, and say that integrating creative placemaking and public art into projects like this does cost money. Because you always want to pay artists, just like any other employees. But there could be grant money available for projects from all sorts of places. And you know, and I think this is really feasible, and I think the impact can be very high because projects like this integrating art art making and art into infrastructure projects can really improve people's experiences interacting with that infrastructure.
So, I think we probably have a conception of what that might look like on a project by project basis. You put a mural on the sound wall, you paint something in the crosswalk, you're replacing your manhole covers, so you do custom ones that have a fun design. But I think, what exactly are we suggesting that we would do to get to that place? Is it an advocacy thing? Is it a we're encouraging some sort of local outreach on a project by project basis by organizations like DOT when they're doing projects? So we're encouraging more of a policy shift on their part to give an opportunity for, can we find some additional matching funds to make this infrastructure a little bit more fun? What is, I guess, the activity for us right now?
I would say that it's probably advocacy related. And in your roles, as in terms of economic development and employment and job creation, I would say it would be advocacy, in collaboration with a number of other organizations that that would be looking at this too.
One of the things that I'm finding is that one of our major problems is attracting highly skilled people, highly trained or educated people. That does a number of things. It brings in people with disposable income to fund other things. We're in Dover attaching some of these things with some of the building projects we have, and having a developer pay for a mural on the building and that kind of thing. But I think it all boils down, to me, to quality of life. And that's really what, in my mind, in Dover, we have to sell. Because I used to try and go out and attract companies and bring in jobs that way. I now go out and try and attract skilled, highly paid people who can now work almost anywhere they want to. And I think quality of life is what we have to sell to get people here. And I think a greater emphasis on appreciation of the arts in all areas of our activities is a positive effect on quality of life.
So Dan, to that point, quality of life is our fourth theme. It has 13 actions, and it's the last one that we have to get to. So I'd like to try and wrap these last couple of infrastructure things so we can move on to that conversation. So number 7, it sounds like we're leaning towards, something like this could have a high impact if it were to work. Where do we think on the feasibility scale in terms of advocating to make this a regular policy or a regular part of the toolkit for people who are doing infrastructure projects?
I think it has high feasibility rate, because if you look at the cost of a project, high feasibility, because if you look at the cost of a project and you look at the arts component of it, it's going to be a small percentage of that project. And I agree with Jenny that we have to pay artists. So I would put it more towards the left, the impact than you have it now, if that's really scaled, right? Maybe somewhere around the middle. That's just my feeling.
I think the actual impact on the infrastructure component is probably low, but I do think when you get to quality of life, it is much more impactful. And I always point to the difference between the General Sullivan Bridge and the Zakim Bridge. And
right, good point.
All right, I'm going to put this squarely in the middle on impact then, if it seems like we're a little bit undecided, but high on feasibility.
All right.
Can I say one more thing about this before we move on?
Sure.
just want to, suggest that advocacy around this kind of thing is very important, so that the placemaking or public art component of these projects is thought about at the beginning. So it's not like it's going to be added on at the end. And so a good example of this is the state's Percent for Art program, which integrates public artwork into state building projects, whether they're significant renovations or new buildings. And so the artwork is integrated right at the very beginning of those projects, and that way it actually has a greater impact on the quality of life in those structures later on, because it wasn't an afterthought. So I'll mute myself now.
I agree with that.
Ginny. I agree with Ginny, and Portsmouth has a Percent for Art program too. It's an upfront thing. We actually follow the state's model up, but we specifically do not have it for infrastructure. It's more for buildings, because I think what this group is talking about is what you might see on the highway. For example, we had $1 million sewer treatment facility that not a lot of public people go to. So I think maybe advocating to change the legislation to include specific types of public infrastructure that's forward facing to the public.
Yep.
All right, thank you. Number 8, link higher density housing to sprawl prevention through zoning.
That's high impact.
What would be the role of this group in managing that?
Well, I think one of the roles we can take is try to craft legislation that we would then try to get sponsored. I mean, if we could agree that it's a good idea to create more density in the downtowns, and less sprawl is better, less nitrogen impact, et cetera.
I agree with Darren. I think that should be in the upper right quadrant because of everything that Darren just said.
All right, anyone else? Great. Number 9, create a long-range port improvement plan to ensure growth of this critical gateway for commerce.
Really curious with number 9, have any of us, I haven't, and I just saw him and didn't think to ask this, checked in with Gino on this? Gino is doing so much of this already.
So I think this came up the last time or whenever this was proposed, and it seems like there is already a long-range port improvement plan that's done by the port.
Correct.
So I think for this one, there may be less for us to do, and more are there ways that we can better integrate the planning work that they've already done, or improve our knowledge and awareness of it, support it, etc.
Yeah, if he needs support, it would be incredible for the regional economic development directors to support anything that he has to go through process with. But
we typically write letters for Gino's projects, but I think, as Robin just said, it would be more it would be more meaningful to have the larger group, especially in light of the Build Back Better application we just did.
I'd like to hear what Ben has to say about it.
No, I think this was actually my contribution, but I think everyone's right. There is a plan. I think we just need to be supportive and advocates for that plan. And as we look at these infrastructure bills and other things coming through, I think we need to just keep the port at the top of our mind instead of just our own little municipal needs as well, because it's a regional resource.
Agree with that.
So we sort of have a clustering of some of these advocacy, support these projects when they come up sort of thing. Is this one to plunk into this growing cluster with 2 and 4 and 6? Hearing none, I'm gonna say yes. And then finally, electric vehicle charging stations.
Again, highly feasible because of the infrastructure bill. And, impact is yet to be determined from my point of view. Again, from my point of view, we have a climate change problem. So getting EV charging stations might prime the pump for the purchase of electric vehicles. So it has a potential high impact problem as well.
I wonder about this too. We just had a business in Somersworth open up with this. It has since closed, but so many people came into me and said the market isn't driving that because there are so many of them already available, and that it's a myth that they're not. I don't know the truth, maybe one of you do, but I know there are charging stations in Newmarket. I know there are charging stations in Portsmouth. I know there are a ton on the New Hampshire Mass border just north of Newburyport. I don't know about anything else. Does anyone else?
Yeah,
It hasn't been a problem.
We have several charging.
Oh, that's right.
stations.
Dover has a ton. Yeah.
So one of the things that may have an influence on this particular thing, I just read yesterday that Ford has produced a charging cable that will now allow you to fully charge any car from empty to full electrically in 4 minutes.
At home.
At home.
Wow.
If I might add, some of you probably already know this, but through a lawsuit from Volkswagen, there's been a ton of money that has been distributed to states across the country, and New Hampshire being one of them. There is money available through New Hampshire DES, believe it or not, to get municipalities and private businesses a opportunity to get a reimbursement for installation of EV charging stations, anywhere from 80% up to 100% of cost of installation. And right now, there's been a big movement up in the North Country, which has now started to expand, and Ben and I have been talking about it here in the Seacoast. But it's an application process. It's open to both municipalities and to private industry. And it's something that, I would think that is important because it's available now. The application process is within the next month or so, money being allocated out in early 22. And I know, for example, in my area, I'm sure Ben is also doing the same up in Portsmouth, is I'm reaching out to our members and also our municipalities to see if there'd be any interest in setting up any additional EV charging stations in our communities. As I said, from what I've been able to understand in the application requirements is that if a municipality is interested in doing an install, it could be up to 100% cost coverage. And there's a variety of different levels of charging stations that could also pass on the cost to the consumer. So the municipality isn't paying the electric bill. But I just wanted to throw that out because that's something that we should be at least strongly considering and passing along to those that are in our communities, that this funding is not going to be around for very long. So you might as well try to take advantage of it.
In Dover, we had an arrangement with Tesla where they would put in 2 stations at points at our transportation center, parking garage, and I think the new high school parking lot. They would put in 2, one exclusively Tesla related and one universal, and they would pay for the whole thing. So that's essentially what we've done so far.
Portsmouth has looked into the Volkswagen money, and we've spoken to the folks at the state. And I agree with John, it's a really great opportunity, 100% cost reimbursement. The problem is the application deadline is late January 28th. And unfortunately, they have a caveat in the RFP that allows the utility to have up to 10 weeks to comment on your locations. And it's a pretty complex application. So we're going to be looking maybe at the next round, because I don't think we can do much in this, given the time frame that's out there now.
So I think, as with some of these other things, this is probably something that whoever your representative on the RPC's technical advisory committees, they've probably known about this for a while. I think the question here is, would you like to know more about sort of what's out there on this topic, what the resources are, and how it interfaces with economic development. A fair amount of these things are something that we could cover if we had a couple of our transportation planners on for a meeting and just sort of talked through, this is the 10-year plan process, this is what the tip is, this is how we advance transportation projects. So if that's something that you would like to learn more about and sort of get the information about how to engage with the transportation processes, I think we could definitely sort of follow up with some of these items together.
So, so James, what John's talking about, and Nancy and what have you, of this particular grant, it's one of the few times I think that as we all work together, in this case, it's competitive. In other words, they're not going to put, we're going after it too. And, we're trying to advocate for them to put it off of, on Hannaford, right off of 101, but they're not going to pick Epping and Hampton and Exeter. They're going to pick one of the three. And so in so much as our group sort of is all working together, sometimes we're going to come with situations like this where, there'll be some competition, particularly for grant money.
Yeah, that's true for the grant money. I think with this technology, it is so changing. Tesla sells a Powerwall that you can put in your house and really lessen the charging time. So, Darren, that's not to say that the state of New Hampshire couldn't put it in the park and ride in Epping. I mean, I think we've got different sources of funding coming at us. So, again, this technology is changing so quickly. We don't know where we're going to be in 10 years. Most people might be able to charge their car in their homes. However, when we're dealing with long-term transportation, people are traveling from far away. We definitely want a very active infrastructure set up on the major highways.
You're right, Warren. As much as I want to see an Exeter, it's a much better fit to put it in the Epping park and ride.
All right, so I think that we definitely are not going to have time to get to quality of life, so we will circle back to that next week. But Theresa, you had sent me an email last week about the CEDRs funding, and that it was, I think, potentially already available for us to use. So if you had sort of a short overview of like how we would access that money and what we're doing with it.
Sure.
If you want to take a couple minutes.
I'm just putting it in the chat now to everyone. It is available online. There it is. It goes up in the chat. So it is, it was $200,000 in total for 4 CEDRs. So they made it easy on us. It's $50,000 seed money for each CEDR. And again, seed money, because we know these monies can be used to help prop up, to help gather data, to get you going, to establish your framework. So yes, it's open. I am not on the side, or I'm not in the BEA portion that determines the viability or gives the stamp of approval to the proposals. So the money has to be encumbered or spent by December 31, 2022, and I believe it's encumbered. It's a reimbursement type of program. That's the most effective because we do have to report back to GNC. These are ARPA funds that are being used. So there's a lot of reporting on the state side that we need to do. So it is set up to make it very easy for all of you to report out results and measurements and what you've done with the money. And we're hoping that the easier we can make it for everybody to access and the simpler the process, then we can leverage that and continue to get additional funding through governor and council. So I can give you an example in that central southern CEDR is having facilitation done to establish strategies or priorities. And the monies can be used to pay for facilitation of that. The monies can be used for administration of the CEDR work. The monies can be used for a particular project. We ask that the money, since it's such a low amount, no more than 3 proposals to come in to use up the 50,000. You will need a fiscal agent or a lead applicant who agrees to spend the money and then put in for the reimbursement. I think we try to make it as easy as possible. So I'm on the front end encouraging you to, as a group, decide how you want to spend the money. Somebody put the proposal in and then it goes to other people who then will reach back out to me and say, you know, where, if they have any questions regarding the CEDR, we'll need to know who they need to contact. So I'm just facilitating it.
Teresa, as
And
an
with
organization, does it have to be a formal organization? In other words, a 501c3 or does it have to be an entity, or can it be this group at large?
So no, it has to be either a 501c6, a 501c3, a RPC. Yes, the state has those requirements still in place.
The fiscal agent needs to be somebody who would normally be eligible to receive EDA funding.
Correct.
Okay.
But we would be able to use the funding for, you know, a private consultant to do work on our behalf. As an
Correct.
example.
So the only thing is the CEDR itself, right? Your stakeholders have to all agree. Yeah, James can't go in and say, "Hey, we're going to take the 50,000 to do that." It goes through this group to say, yes, we agree to that proposal, and that's how we want to apply or use the monies.
Can I ask a
So
couple quick
then it
questions?
also sounds like you want to hear from us when we have a concrete proposal for how that money would be used. You don't want, hey, we're putting in for our 50,000 and then we're going to come up with ideas.
Correct.
Here is a proposal for how we're going to use 15,000 of it. And then maybe a month or 2 later, here's our proposal for the next 10. Here's our proposal for the final 25.
Right, because it is on a reimbursement basis. So the idea is that, yes, you can put in for the entire 50,000 and you can list out several different projects under that 50,000. We'll use it for facilitation of this. We'll use it for drafting maps, data collection. You can have several different items under one full ask, or you can break it into, 3 asks at most.
Okay. Sounds good. So
Somebody else had a question.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. First off, I would propose that SRPC take the lead and be the fiscal agent. I think that's pretty easy for us to determine. Also, I would propose that since it's a reimbursement, I'd be very happy to go to my town select board asking for 10 grand or 5 grand or whatever. So we could split that up. We could come up with the money. I'm sure every town would put some money in. I don't think that's a big deal. The question I have though, for BEA is, you had mentioned something else, Teresa. You said there may be opportunities for funding beyond this.
Yes.
Is there any specificity to that, or that's just been said by Taylor and others?
So I can without, I don't want to commit those that are working in Central Southern to something. They're just looking at it, but they have some logistics type of projects in mind and strategies. So what they're doing is considering how would they access seed money to help take the first step in a study relating to a specific logistics project. And then I have already cleared the way with the deputy director for Gopher. Is there any interest or amenable to considering such a proposal? So that's how we leverage the monies, and I've gotten a yes. So if there is a particular project that this group would like to consider, then usually I'll go to our commissioner or DOT commissioner or Gopher, whomever, and say, here's the group, here's what they're thinking about. Is there, could we put the proposal in? Would it be considered? And is it possible for an additional funding stream? So there's one way. And then the other way is straight through our commissioner to governor and council. Many, many different pots of money. So yes, that's how we plan to leverage this 50,000, is by the creation of proposals and projects that then I or BEA can take forward to our partner agencies on your behalf.
So
That's great.
sort of
That motivates us, I
simultaneously,
think.
can we make this part of a package for individual things to advance them? And then
Absolutely.
also, if we show that return on investment on the first 50,000, it might be easier in the future to make the case for another 50,000 of seed money, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely.
So James, I know we're going to pick this up next week, but I'm going to suggest that after we get done with our exercise next week, we start talking about what the proposals might be. And if maybe within a month we can get something in, we're going to have more lucky to get more money down the road if we get it in.
No, that's exactly what we are envisioning this process leading towards, is once we've sort of identified the things that are those high impact, high feasibility things for this group, is to sort of take that shorter list of things and say, all right, what would you like us to put a scope together on for 2 or 3 of those projects?
Right. It's just creating a larger platform for you to operate on. So it may be a particular DOT project, and we all know DOT is going through that plan. It's going to get voted on in June. You may have one particular strategy or one particular project that you all want to agree on and say, yes, can we go in and can we get the extra funding for this through the CEDR? And you all carry a lot of influence and a lot of weight. So
can we pause? I know Tim has his hand up, and I know Tim and I have some specific questions here. Tim, you want to go?
I will try and answer.
I was going to let you go first, Jen, if that's all right.
Well, you just, sure, I'll go first. You keep referencing going to DOT. However, you know, the DOT funding system is very structured and rigid. So, and, you know, that's the realm that Tim and I work in, you know, 90% of our time. And so just trying to understand what additional dollars are at DOT. And I don't know that that's something that's necessarily feasible because of the very prescriptive nature in federal transportation funding.
Well, we do see that window of opportunity with DOT specifically in this project that Central Southern is considering. We see, because of the infrastructure bill, because of certain other fundings opening up, because of the strategic plan getting voted, there's just a window of opportunity where we can elevate some conversations from whether it's the airport or whether it's on the commuter rail for Manchester and Concord or Nashua. Public transit. We can try to use we have all 3 RPCs represented in the Central Southern CEDR. So they already have contacts and projects and discussions happening. So then as a group of stakeholders, it's having that conversation and advocating, like a lot of the work that you're talking about here is advocating, and how that group then advocates together to strengthen that message and elevate projects that are already started or already being considered. And then, like I said, we take it to a commissioner level, and there's nothing set in stone yet. And we know that there's still a lot of unknowns. So that's how the approach is. It's to go through our RPCs. Central Southern is kind of looking at it like chambers or other organizations are like, we don't have the bandwidth to do this. This is not our expertise. But what we can do is educate ourselves, inform ourselves, and then support the work of the RPCs that are in the CEDR. Does that make more sense to you?
I mean,
So,
I think what I'm hearing though, if I can sort of interpret what I'm hearing, is that I'm going to decode this and say you're probably talking about the Capital Rail, the Boston to Manchester rail project, and that
it could be one of them. Yes.
Yeah. All right. But so what you're really saying is you're leveraging the authority of the MPO is through the CEDRs, what you're really trying to do here. So
yes, sir.
I wouldn't portray this whole concept though as we can take an idea from this group and go to DOT, because
no.
If I'm reading this right, if I'm hearing you right, it's the projects that I'm thinking about in those MPO regions are very advanced, far along, high priorities in a long-standing planning process.
Right.
We're not going to come in out of left field with a project on Route 101 and woo the DOT into giving us money. It's just not going to happen. It's so.
Well, we have another, that one has been in process, yes. But there is another one that is not, but no, you're not going to take something out of left field and then convince the commissioner or DOT to put it. But there are so many projects in there, like John had mentioned, something being in there for 8 or 10 years, right?
Yeah, right. I'm with you.
Yeah.
So we're not
That's
talking
more
about.
what we're
So we're not talking about circumventing the regulated transportation planning process. Because that's something where those resources are very carefully divided up amongst the state. And so if we were to circumvent that process, it would create inappropriate inequities.
No. We're not circumventing anything, Jen. We are
So-
looking at what they've already established and is there opportunities
So
with
Theresa-
the infrastructure bill.
Teresa, just as a friendly word of advice, I would caution how you speak about leveraging additional transportation dollars because it's very prescribed, and it's something that we all work very hard on to make sure that our communities get their fair share. Things are done properly and transparently. So it's definitely, So
I would just say this sort of hearing what you're saying, Teresa, now that I hear it in the sort of different context, it does speak to the importance and the value of what the MPOs do and what the RPCs do as in their role in transportation, because without that you can't even begin to have that conversation. So it's a good opportunity there. So in light of what you're saying, the one project that's on our list in front of us is that Ocean Boulevard piece that probably needs a little bit of a push, because I think it's not fully understood how much that's going to cost given the climate impacts. That might be an area where, some of the infrastructure money could maybe advance that project. So if it's working through the MPO and it sounds exactly like you are, then I think it'll work out all right.
Yes, we're working through the proper processes, and if the terminology or words that I use don't blend up, we're not doing that. No, we are, but our approach in Central Southern is we've assumed that everybody understands the process. So let's start with educating and informing ourselves on the process, and then understanding the work that the MPOs and the RPCs do. And it was an easier path for us to say, okay, what are RPCs and MPOs? What are the priorities that you've been working on, or projects? And then the group looks and says, well, these are ones that we can absolutely support and get behind. How can we help you? How can we advocate for this? And I think that's a great role for the CEDR.
Thank you. Sorry.
No.
Touchy there. Just wanted to make sure.
Oh, no. Absolutely. I'm a newbie. I'm like, no, it's not a problem. it's good advice. Thank you.
All right.
All right, I think we will leave it there for this week and pick up next week with some final discussions and hopefully some next steps then.
Great.
So, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.